In this video, we're going to model the front air dam of our Ferrari 308 using Fusion 360. Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in this video, we're going to tackle the front end of the Ferrari 308. Now, at this point, we have modeled a good chunk of the body. The process that we use to do the middle is going to be the same as the back, and actually the rear of the car is fairly open. There is a panel that's set in for the taillights and the bumper and tag, but in general, the body lines sort of end at the back, and that's kind of how a lot of cars of this era actually were made. They didn't roll down and have nice integrated bumpers like we see today on a lot of cars, and really that's based on crash safety and a few other things. But we want to tackle the front end of this car. And it is important to note that there are different versions of the front end of this car. Ultimately, there is there's like a GTS and a GTB, and depending on the year and potentially the trim, you might get a different front bumper. So what we're going to be taking a look at is we're going to try to model this front bumper, and this is a pretty standard front bumper that you would see on the cars of this era. There is also a wide body kit, and I mentioned very early on in the first video that sort of the inspiration for modeling this car was based on a YouTube build on a Stancework channel where he's taking a 308 and he's doing a wide body. And the wide body is based on a Liberty Walk wide body kit for these cars. And the Liberty Walk wide body kits are, essentially fender flares. It takes this front lip and pulls it down a little bit farther. There's some more air openings and grills and stuff like that. So it is a cool addition, but it always starts with the stock car. So what we're going to do is we're going to model this as stock, and it might be a fun challenge to actually modify it and model things like the fender flares. So from here, let's go ahead and get started. And as always, if you are carrying on with your own version, go ahead and use that. I haven't done anything since the last video, but if you had any trouble or you want to start here, you can download this file in the description with the Fusion 360 link. So the front of the car has the same sort of gap that we created in the middle of the car. It's a nice feature, but again, as I mentioned in the side, it isn't really very easy to do in forms. It causes problems because we're trying to take this nice smooth body line and sort of make this cutout. And the way that we did it was extruding with creases, and it worked fine. But now we actually have to do this going around a corner, and that's going to produce its own challenge. So we have to think about the process and the way that we're going to do this very carefully. Now, we could simply take that entire edge and we could scale it instead of extruding. I mean, it would be an extrude, but we could scale it in rather than translating it. But one of the things that we have to be real careful of with this is we're going across the symmetry line. And when we do that, we actually have to grab the entire edge. And if we don't, what's going to happen is at the middle, it won't be welded together, and we'll have to go back and weld those vertices. So it's much easier to just handle it now. But by double clicking that edge, we are able to grab a lot of it. And then we're going to use our selection options to grow or shrink. So when we shrink, you'll notice that it's not changing any of these selections, but we can use the loop grow or shrink, and we can begin pulling back some of those edges. And what we're looking to do is get to the point before we actually had that crease. We really want to avoid that crease, and we're going to take care of those transitions manually. If you want to control the flare a bit more, we could also remove this one from our selection, but I think it's going to work out okay. So I'm going to go to a bottom view because it'll let me actually see what we're doing here. And I'm going to use, again, Alt and Control because I'm on a PC, and then I'm going to use the scale in plane. So this option in the corner will allow me to scale in X and Y, and it'll pull these in. It's not going to be perfect, but it'll get us pretty close. I'm going to let go. Notice that we need to move a couple of these vertices, and also notice that I'm working in box display. Now, when we move these vertices around, we want to keep the width of this face as we're looking at it consistent. So that's going to be an important consideration. And this one here, we'll go ahead and move that. And now that we've extruded this edge, we can double click on it. We don't have to worry about any additional selections, but we do need to move to a side view. Now we're going to use, again, Alt and Control if you're on a PC, and we're going to pull this down. We're going to extrude it down, and we want to make sure that we match the blueprint. So you might need to bring the canvases back. You might need to pull this up a little bit. And what we're looking to do is to get it to be about the same as the one back here. Now, if you remember the value that we used, then you can do that. I think it was 25 millimeters, but I'm going to go ahead and just sort of estimate. And then once again, Alt and Control on a PC, we're going to use Command and Option on a Mac, and we want to scale them out. And then once again, we need to come back and fix the location of these vertices. So I'm going to pull that out until it's about vertical with that. I might want to pull it back just a little bit. And we'll take a look at this one here. I'm going to pull that out. And we'll take a look at this one over here. Pull this one forward. And same thing here. Pull that forward. So at this point, what we've done is we've created the lip. And of course, in the center, it actually is not going to be there. It's going to be non-existent because most of this gets cut out for the original bumper bar that had turn signals and a grill underneath it. But we're still going to build it as if it's there, and then we'll get rid of it later. That's not necessarily a requirement. It's just the way that we're going to approach this. And then again, I'm going to double click this edge to grab the loop. You can use the loop selection options if you want, but double clicking works pretty well, especially if you already have what you need. So again, Alt and Control. This time I'm going to pull this down and back. And here is where it gets a little tricky because what we're doing is we're trying to follow the curvature. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to let go of that and then hold Alt again and pull it down one more time. And then I want to take this edge and bring it down, but I want to use, I want to sort of move these around because remember we have more geometry that needs to come down. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get these vertices to be lined up where I think they should be to make a nice, clean and consistent patch. Now, I'm using the term patch, which is also a surface type of tool, but in this case, I'm really just talking about the layout of these different divisions. There's other things that we can call them, but that's just kind of what I'm working off of. And keep in mind too, if we bring back a picture of the car, there's a lot of detail that's going to happen in here. This bottom lip flares out and then it kind of flares in, but it's sort of wide here. So there is probably going to be some more subdivisions here. But let's look at this from the side and let's just see where we're at. So this version is actually the smaller front fender or the smaller lip. It's not the low one. The low one is going to come down to pretty much the body line. Since I already know that we will need more control in this area, I'm going to extrude this edge again, holding down Alt, and I'm going to do it one more time because I want to keep this edge here roughly horizontal. So I'm going to take some of these vertices, and again, I really urge you to work in 2D. So we're looking at this from the side, and we're only moving in plane. We're only moving, in this case, in Y and Z. When you start to try to move things around in 3D, it becomes really cumbersome. It becomes hard to control, and it can just kind of get away from you. So we're going to pull this down, and this is actually going to come back out. And I'm just going sort of by feel because I don't have a blueprint here for this. Let's go ahead and switch back to smooth display for a second just to see if we're even close. I think I want to take these faces and pull them back a bit more, make it a bit more drastic. And this bottom edge, I'm going to extrude one more time, and I'm going to go ahead and just hold down Alt and pull this down, and I'm going to make a very small division there. And the reason I'm doing that is to sort of give me that lip, something that I can control. So if we go back to box display mode, you can see that we've got that lip there. Now here's where it's going to begin to get tricky because we need to carry these lines underneath and then flare back out. So from the front, when we're looking at this, these vertices are going to end up coming in on the side and then flaring back out. And as they get closer to the wheel well, they're going to flare back out to wherever the wheel well is. And again, because we don't have an image for this, we have to kind of use our best judgment, but we're still going to follow the same process of trying to keep the distance between these edges the same and consistent. And then when we view this from the right side, remember that we're going to continue to build back. So that looks pretty good so far. And in a smooth display, it's not perfect. It's not ideal because I think we need a little bit more control in the middle, but it does get us pretty close. In order to get this a little bit closer, I'm going to take this edge and I'm going to pull it down closer to this edge. I might want to pull this one up a little bit as well. And the reason I'm doing that is to get a tighter crease. I think we're actually going to end up adding more edges here. And I probably want to pull these two back a little bit just to get that tighter transition. Okay, so that's looking a little bit better. Again, we need to flare out the sides, but this is the process that we're going for. So that looks pretty good. Let's go to a side view and back to box display, and let's begin building out the rest of this fender. So I'm going to turn off the construction geometry and canvases, and I want to just sort of work this back into the fender. Okay, so we're going to take this edge and we're going to just select all the edges as we go down. Again, remember that we can use the grow or shrink option. We need to be kind of careful depending on the geometry that we're selecting. So we're going to grab all the way down to the bottom, even this lip here. Go to a right-hand view now that we have that selected. And I want to start extruding that back using just Alt. We want to keep that curvature continuous, and we're going to go back until about where that edge is, and then we're going to do one more. All right, so this is going to get tricky to control. Before we do anything with the control, we're going to go to Modify, and we're going to Weld Vertices. We're going to bring this one out to here, this one out to here, and then we'll worry about adding a T-point later. Right now, I'm just worried about getting those connected, and then we're going to sort of start to work on the shape. So from the right, I know that this needs to essentially follow the fender line and roll in. So it's going to be difficult for us to see from the front because we just extruded it back. So what I'm going to do to make this easier is I'm going to go to Modify, and I'm just going to start pulling some of these out. And I'm only doing this so I can see them. Then when I view this from the front, now it's a bit easier for me to see what I'm working with. I can see the line of the fender here where I'm expecting them to go, and I can see where they actually are. So I know that this edge needs to come out, and then this sort of gives me a good reference. And I think I'll probably bring this out a little bit as well, and maybe even bring this edge out. Not quite as far because I still want to see and focus on that. And then from here, we can begin to determine what we want that shape to look like. So I think this vertex is going to start to go in. This one will start to go in as well. And we can always pull some of this other stuff in. So again, that'll give us visibility of what we're trying to work on. And we can also see where the body line is here. So this is where the body really starts to roll under, and it gives us a good reference of where we should be with, with our geometry. Let's take a quick look at this in smooth display. You can see that it flares out pretty drastically at the edge, and that's not what I want. So I want to bring these vertices out to meet it. Okay, so again, from the front view, what I want to do is I want to bring this vertex out. And what I'm looking at, again, is a consistent width here. I don't necessarily need them to be perfectly in front of each other, but I want to keep that consistent width. So that way, when I'm working on these different areas, that it's nice and smooth in terms of its transition. Now, if I take a look at this in smooth display, you can see that looks much better. This stuff needs to get pulled in quite a bit more, though. So in box display, I want to take some of these vertices and I want to pull them in to make that flare more drastic, and I want to keep it horizontal with these other edges. So I'm going to bring those in, take this edge, bring it in, and I might even need to bring these up. And you'll notice that these are tapering a little bit closer together, and that's not necessarily a bad thing if we want the geometry to taper. So if we want it to appear to flare in or crease or flare out, then we can control that by the distance between there. So now if we go to smooth display, you can see that we're getting that transition. We kind of have the shape that we're looking for, but this really needs to roll down before it rolls forward. But now that we have some control, we're able to begin tweaking and changing it. So from the side, I'm going to take these two edges, I'm going to pull them forward, I'm going to look at it in smooth display, and that gradual transition looks a bit better. We could spend a lot of time trying to tweak and change this, but that looks pretty good. All right, and this is one of those areas where it really makes sense for us later on to use surfacing tools in order to cut the geometry away rather than to try to make those openings here. We can certainly try. I'm going to save it before I do. We can certainly try, and there are a couple different ways that we can make this easier on ourselves. We know that the front bumper actually, the fender line kind of comes in. This section is gone on the car, as is this section here and this section. The rest of it is kind of left open. So if we want to get rid of this, there are a couple different ways that we can do it. The crease, of course, makes it more challenging. But one thing that we can do is we can come in and we can delete these edges. Let's go ahead and rotate this around. We need to make sure that we do select them all. So you probably will need to rotate until you find them all. And then when we look at this from the front, we can hit delete. Now, it doesn't look anything like the car. And the reason for that is because we need to extrude that stuff back. So if we want to extrude it back, let's go ahead and bring this out. We need to extrude it back with a crease. So I'm going to have to take these edges and I'm going to use Alt and Control, and then I want to move them back in this case, it's going to be in the Y direction. So Alt and Control, and I'm just going to go straight back. And what I've done is I've creased that, and that's going to help give me that, that shape that I need. I'm going to need to do the same thing on the bottom edge. And again, it's more complicated than if we were just to do it with surfaces. So I do want to make that disclaimer. It's not the best way for us to do this, but again, I do want to make sure that we explore it. And from here, where we really need to be careful is all of this stuff needs to be extruded back. So I'm going to do it just on one side. Let's zoom in, make sure we select everything. It's going to get tricky, but again, Alt and Control, and let's pull it back. And the reason it's going to get tricky is because of this edge. I'm actually going to shrink this edge down a little bit. We probably won't notice in any images or renders, but I'm going to shrink it down and I'm going to taper it in. And that's just going to make it a little bit easier for me. And then this one, I'm going to pull back forward a little bit. And the reason I'm going to do that is I want it more in line with this. And just to make it easier to select, I'm going to push it back in. And pushing it back in, again, helps sort of hide it. Now we need to go to weld vertices, and we need to put some of these together. So I'm going to take this one to here. I'm going to rotate this around, and I'll take this one to here. And in order to get this to look right, we're going to have to create some creases. Now, again, it's not ideal. It's not ideal, and you can see what it did to the rest of the geometry. So if we want to get a truly good representation of this, it's going to have to be done with a lot of different edges. And honestly, it's really not worth the hassle. So I'm going to use Control Z. Hopefully we can get back far enough to the point before we deleted everything. And this looks a whole lot better, right? So that's why I think it's not worth the hassle or the effort to try to make those grill openings, because what you're going to end up with is a lot of vertices to control that shape in that area. And obviously the shape is relatively simple to control at this point. We don't have a lot of divisions, but it's going to get a lot more tricky. So things like the headlights and the grill openings and other features that can be easily done with sketches and parametric features in the design workspace, really something that we should focus on there. But at this point, we want to make sure that we've saved any work. If you want to try to make that grill opening, go for it. Just note that it is going to be a giant headache. So Make sure that you do keep that in mind and you do save often in case you want to go back to an older version. But if you have any questions, please let me know. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.